They didn't linger. They didn't explain. They didn't look back. Marlene Bishop stood on the threshold of her small brick home. Not the big wide farmhouse she imagined her youth, but weather-worn 3 bedrooms still held together by threadbare curtains and faded memories. She didn't ask why her daughter Mariah had come home unannounced or why Mariah looked so restless, eyes tracking the street, shoulders tossing like she was carrying storm clouds. She just opened the door and let the children file in, one after the other. No hellos, no kisses on the cheek, just backpacks, duffel bags, and wounded eyes that scanned the living room for places to drop. 11 souls stepped into that living room. 10 children and their grandmother, who moved out of the way, resigned. Some wandered toward the couch. Others shuffled into bedrooms, trailing suitcases behind them like lost luggage. Questions drifted across the quiet. What's for dinner? Is Mom coming back? Marlene didn't answer. She simply stepped aside and closed the door behind their mother. Minutes later, the van roared to life and vanished down Maple Grove Road. A door slammed shut. No hugs. No I love you. Just silence. Inside, chaos unfurled like a storm. A toddler wailed because his missed bottle was still missing. 2 children argued over a tablet charger. Someone spilled juice on the hallway carpet. One of the older ones asked if the Wi-Fi was working, voice pitched like a plea. Marlene leaned against the doorframe and watched the mayhem gently grow. Spilled cereal, piles of unlaundered clothes, toys strewn about. And then she walked away toward the kitchen. That night, the dinner she served was paper thin. White bread sandwiches with deli ham and a handful of chips. The kind kids eat when the microwave is broken or dinner simply doesn't matter. She passed them out mechanically. Twice. Each child took theirs without a word. They learned early that asking for more meant trouble, at least in this house. There was no argument about the meal, no request for dessert. They accepted what was given and moved on, eyes hollow, stomachs half full. When bedtime came, the house felt heavy. The only sounds were of a whirling fan in the hallway. Children dozed off on couches, a pile of blankets here and there, somewhere between the living room floor and bedroom doorways. There were bunk beds for kids on one set, 3 on another. The youngest 3 were tucked into one queen mattress pressed along the wall of the smallest room. Pillows were shared, sheets tangled. Kids' breaths came uneven but quiet. The house didn't breathe. It only waited. By Sunday morning, the Bishop home was dead silent. Not a cartoon playing. Not a door creaking. Not even footsteps in the hallway. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Simone, across the yard, stepped outside with her morning coffee. No movement behind the curtains. No bikes left on the porch. The row of kids' shoes normally lining the entrance were absent. Mrs. Simone raised her eyebrows high, stared down the street with suspicion. She walked over, brought muffins in a paper bag, tapped on the door. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Silence. She left the muffins on the porch and retreated, uncertain, but something was off, a stillness unnatural. The mailbox was bulging. Envelopes, letters, a box addressed to Bishop residence. Attention, youngest child. All untouched since Friday. Monday morning amplified the dread. People looked toward the Bishop house from their porches. Curtains lifted. WhatsApp groups chirped. Has anyone heard from her? I saw the children's backpacks still on the swing. The street, which once buzzed with childish energy, now felt hollow. The house that used to be the loudest on the block had gone mute, and every passerby felt the weight of that silence, squeezing down on their chest. No one dared knock again. No one peered through blinds. Fear spread, not like wildfire, but as a slow shiver, the kind that lingers after dusk. And in the quiet, a tension thickened, as if the air itself held its breath. Tuesday morning began the way it always did on Maple Grove. Dew on the grass, dogs barking in the distance, the mailman whistling as he made his rounds. But as he approached the Bishop house, something tugged at him. The box was still overflowing. Flyers curled at the edges. A child's shoebox sat on the porch with glitter stickers peeling off, addressed in crooked handwriting, to Grandma. It had been there since Friday. Unclaimed, unopened. He paused longer than usual, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked up at the house. Still. Too still. He noted it mentally, the way postal workers do when something breaks routine. Then he moved on, but not before glancing back twice. That evening, a tan sedan pulled into the empty driveway. The engine cut off, but no one got out for several minutes. Inside sat a woman in her 30s, dark lipstick faded, hair in a quick braid, nervous fingers tapping the steering wheel. This was Cassandra Bennett, Marlene's niece from 2 towns over. She hadn't heard from her aunt in 5 days. At first, that didn't seem unusual. Marlene didn't text often. But when Cassandra's mother called her asking if she'd seen the kids lately, something cold passed over her spine. Now, sitting outside the Bishop home, Cassandra studied the windows. No movement. No light switching on or off. She rang the doorbell. Nothing. Knocked. Still nothing. Her calls to Marlene had gone straight to voicemail. No text receipts. Just silence. She dug through her purse for the spare key Marlene had given her a year ago, just in case. She stood on the porch for what felt like forever before unlocking the door. The air inside didn't smell stale, it smelled heavy. It clung to her skin, the way a sealed attic might, or a sealed tomb. "Hello?" she called out, stepping in. No response. Not a shuffle. Not a whisper. But the TV was on, playing static. It was the only sound in the house. Cassandra moved slowly through the living room. It was tidy, spotless, almost. That was the first red flag. Marlene had 10 children in her care. This kind of order didn't exist in reality. Blankets were folded, toys put away, cups stacked neatly in the sink. It looked more like a waiting room than a family home. Then she saw her. Marlene sat in the armchair near the window, hands folded neatly in her lap, still as stone. She didn't blink, didn't flinch when Cassandra gasped. She just turned her head slightly and looked. Her eyes weren't empty. They were hollowed, like something had been scooped out and replaced with shadow. "And Marlene," Cassandra whispered. "Where are the kids?" Marlene said nothing, didn't move, didn't break eye contact. That was enough. Cassandra backed out, heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear her own breath. She stumbled off the porch, clutching her phone. The 911 call came in at 9:13 a.m. The dispatcher kept her voice calm, trained, but Cassandra was too shaken to give clear details. "Just send someone," she repeated. "Please, now." By the time patrol cars rolled up, a crowd had formed across the street. Neighbors stood on their porches in robes and jackets, whispering. The officers knocked first. When no answer came, they stepped inside. The silence inside was unnatural, deeper than empty, wrong. In the living room, they found her just like Cassandra had described. Marlene sitting calmly, unmoving, with her hands folded. The officers asked her to stand. She did so slowly, mechanically. No resistance. No questions. No words. They led her to the kitchen table as more officers entered the house. Room by room, door by door. What they found inside would fracture the soul of every cop on the scene. 10 children, each tucked neatly into their beds, fully dressed as if laid down after school day. No signs of violence. No blood. No mess. No broken lamps or shattered glass. It was eerily quiet. Too clean. Too prepared. One room held 4 children on bunk beds, 2 above, 2 below. All still. Another held 3 on sleeping bags, neatly zipped. The smallest room had a crib. Inside, a toddler on his back, pacifier still tucked under his chin. All gone. Detectives were called. The forensics van parked quietly out front. Crime scene techs suited up and moved in. They checked the windows, locked. No forced entry. No broken screens. No signs of anyone coming or going except Marlene. Back in the kitchen, a note was found taped unevenly to the refrigerator. 3 words. "I gave everything." Below it, a photo, an old one, printed on matte paper, of the toddler in the crib, smiling, red shirt, big cheeks. The shirt read Grandma's Buddy. There were no other fingerprints on the note but Marlene's. The handwriting was firm, each line written slowly, deliberately, and traced over twice. It wasn't a suicide note. It wasn't a confession. It was a statement, a final message. Outside, word spread fast. Reporters arrived within an hour. A helicopter circled overhead. Photos of the children from school newsletters and social media were pulled into headlines. 10 found dead in family home. The Bishop House tragedy. The public was horrified, but confused. Why? How? Who could do such a thing? But the horror was just beginning. When they took Marlene in for questioning, she did not cry. She did not ask for a lawyer. She answered each question slowly, clearly, with a tone so unnerving that even seasoned detectives looked away. She didn't speak in riddles or nonsense. She didn't blame voices or God or nightmares. She blamed silence. I just wanted the noise to stop. The house at the end of Maple Ridge always sounded like a living thing. Doors slammed. Cartoons blared. Footsteps bounced up the hallways like echoes in a cave. But that weekend, something changed. It wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't anything. It was just still. The first to notice was Miss Lucille across the street, a retired teacher with a stiff hip and sharp eyes. She was up early that Saturday morning, as usual, sipping her coffee on the porch, expecting to see the usual chaos. But the windows at the Harrow house were closed, curtains drawn, no kids' bikes strewn across the lawn, no toys, no chalk drawings, not even the usual sagging diaper bag tossed on the steps. By 10 a.m., Lucille was squinting. Noon came, and she was pacing. That house had 10 children. 10. It was never still, never quiet. At 12:15, Lucille walked across the street with a bag of muffins and knocked. She rang the bell twice. Nothing. She leaned close to the door, listening for a giggle, a whine, a television hum. Nothing. She left the muffins on the step and walked back slower than she came, the hair on her arm standing upright. By late afternoon, other neighbors noticed too. The mailman paused as he saw the mailbox overflowing. A package marked urgent, perishable sat untouched. A child's shoe box labeled Zadie School Project was still there from Friday morning. Still no movement. On Sunday morning, 2 boys from down the block dared each other to peek through the side window. One boosted the other onto an old milk crate. The blinds were shut tight. The air felt wrong. They ran off without a word. By Sunday night, worry turned to fear. One of the cousins, Tanisha, drove in from the next town over. She hadn't heard from Loretta in 4 days. That wasn't unheard of. Loretta wasn't exactly glued to her phone, but it felt off. She called. Voicemail. Texted. Nothing. She parked outside and knocked. Waited. Knocked again. Still nothing. That's when Tanisha remembered she had a spare key. Loretta had given it to her after one of the kids got locked out once. She used it slowly, heart thudding as the lock clicked open. What she felt as the door creaked inward wasn't stale air. It was something heavier. A vacuum of sound. No television. No crying baby. No arguments over whose turn it was to use the charger. Tanisha stepped inside and called out, "Loretta?" Silence. She walked further, past the living room that should have been littered with blankets and juice cups. Instead, it was immaculate. Sofa cushions fluffed. A half-eaten sandwich on a plate. Lights still on. The only sound was the tick of a clock, like a countdown to something terrible. She didn't need to check the whole house. Just one hallway, one open door. Then she turned and ran. The 911 call came in at 9:03 a.m. Monday morning. "You need to send someone now. Please." That's all Tanisha could say. The dispatcher tried to ask for details, but she was hyperventilating. Officers arrived within 10 minutes. They knocked, then entered. What they found was a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The living room was bright, unnaturally clean. The smell of citrus cleaner mixed with something faintly metallic. Loretta sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead like she'd been waiting. She didn't look up as the officers approached. "Ma'am, are you all right?" No response, just a slow blink. They asked her to stand. She did. They moved through the house, opening doors one by one. And that's when it all changed. 10 children. All of them. Each tucked into beds. Some in bunk beds. Some in sleeping bags. The toddler in the crib. All dressed. All still. Not a single sign of struggle. Not a sound. No blood. No broken glass. Only silence. Each child was cold. The detectives noted the positioning. Arms by sides. Blankets pulled to chests. Favorite stuffed animals beside them. It was methodical, deliberate. They weren't just laid down. They were tucked in as if for a final night's rest. Paramedics called it in. Then crime scene techs arrived. Photographs. Measurements. Samples. Nothing made sense. There were no forced entries. No signs of poison. No syringes or pills or food left out. Everything was in order. Too much in order. And in the center of it all sat Loretta Harrow. Calm. Still. Silent. On the fridge was a note, taped unevenly, as if the tape had run out halfway through. I'm not their mother. I gave everything I had. That was it. Nothing more. Beside was a photo of the youngest, 2 years old, smiling big with missing front tooth and a red shirt that said, Granny's boy. That photo would become the face of the tragedy. The quote would become its name. Within hours, the media descended. I gave everything I had. News stations repeated the line again and again. Commentators debated its meaning. Was it an excuse? A confession? A final cry for help? Back at the station, Loretta didn't cry. She didn't speak until asked. She declined a lawyer. She declined water. And when the questions came, she answered them all, one by one. I couldn't take it anymore. I asked for help. No one listened. I didn't want them to suffer through another year of being forgotten. She spoke like someone giving testimony from a dream, voice even, eyes distant. What she never did was say she was sorry. As officers reviewed the files, more disturbing details emerged. Loretta had contacted child welfare 3 times in the last 12 months. Each time, she said the same things. I'm tired. I'm overwhelmed. There are too many. And each time, the response was the same. No visible signs of abuse. No immediate danger. Case closed. The city's child welfare office issued a brief statement. We are deeply saddened. An internal review is underway. But no one cared about the review. The only thing that mattered was the number. 10. 10 children. Gone. And one woman who had once sung lullabies now sat in a cell with nothing in her hands but a paper-thin blanket and silence. By the time news of the Harrow House deaths hit the evening broadcast, it was no longer local. The tragedy had crossed county lines, state lines, and then went national. 10 children, 1 house, 1 grandmother. It was the kind of headline that made people stop mid-sentence and reach for the remote. But while reporters scrambled for sound bites and neighbors held each other on camera, one name was notably absent: the mother. When detectives finally tracked down Sienna Harrow, she was hundreds of miles away, not hiding, not running, but shopping. She was holed up in a mid-range hotel just outside Houston, Texas. The room smelled like takeout and perfume. Shopping bags lined the windowsill. A takeout container with congealed fries sat on the nightstand. Her phone was off. A man, early 30s, forgettable, answered the door. Ma'am, we need to speak with you, one of the officers said. Sienna didn't get up right away. She was scrolling through a dating app, headphones in. When she finally looked up, she smiled, a small, tired smile. Then, seeing the badges, she frowned. You're not here about the guy next door, are you? When they told her why they were there, what had happened, she blinked. Laughed, even, not because she thought it was funny, but because it made no sense. It couldn't be real. 10 children? Her mother? No way. They handed her a paper. Her mother's name. The word deceased. A list of 10 first names printed underneath. The same 10 she had given birth to. The color drained from Sienna's face. She staggered off the bed, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. She tried to speak. Then the scream came, loud, raw, and terrifying. Her knees buckled. She collapsed to the floor. But by the time she was taken into a separate room for questioning, The public had already made up their mind. She was the mother. She was gone. And 10 kids were dead. By Monday night, Sienna's name was trending online for all the wrong reasons. Photos of her surface, bathroom selfies, club snapshots, Vegas trips, and captions like, "Mom deserves a break too, and don't judge me unless you're paying my bills." People weren't just angry at Loretta. They were furious with Sienna. Where was she? How do you drop 10 kids off and vanish? She didn't even call for 4 days. The blame came hard and fast. On Facebook, angry posts filled her old friends' pages. On Reddit, threads exploded with screenshots of her lifestyle. On Instagram, trolls flooded her DMs. But the real trial hadn't even started. Back at the station, detectives sat across from her. She was quieter now, her makeup smudged, hands trembling. They asked when she last saw the children. She couldn't remember the exact date. Early last week? How long were they supposed to stay with your mother? A few days, maybe a week? Did she seem tired? She always seems tired. Did she ask for help? She never said she couldn't do it. They asked if she had checked in. No, I needed a break. How often did you leave them with her? Sienna looked down. Too often. She confessed that the arrangement had been informal. No custody filings. No court documents. Just grandma duty stretched longer and longer as the years went on. She had left town to clear her head. She hadn't told anyone where she was going. She hadn't checked her messages. And she hadn't expected anything other than what had always happened, Loretta taking care of things. But this time, Loretta didn't. Sienna wasn't arrested. She hadn't broken any laws, at least not in the eyes of the system. But in the court of public opinion, she might as well have been wearing an orange jumpsuit. Even some of her family wanted her gone. When she returned to Arkansas and tried to participate in funeral planning, she was met with cold shoulders and quiet refusals. Some relatives didn't want her name on the programs. One uncle openly told her, "You gave her the kids. You might as well have pulled the trigger." She tried to defend herself, but the words fell flat. "I was doing my best." She never told me she couldn't handle it. I didn't know. Every phrase felt like sand in a tidal wave. Her cousins, once defenders of her wild lifestyle, began to distance themselves. No one offered her a ride. No one invited her to the vigils. Even the church that once hosted baby showers wouldn't return her calls. Meanwhile, reporters lined up outside the courthouse, microphones pointed like weapons. And when asked if she had anything to say, Sienna stood silent. The damage had already been done. But as grief turned into outrage, another question started to rise. Not shouted, not posted online, but whispered. Quietly, where were the fathers of the 10 children? 8 different surnames appeared in school records, different addresses, different emergency contacts, most outdated. Some birth certificates left the father's name blank altogether. Detectives tried to make calls. Some were disconnected. Others rang endlessly. Not one father came to hospital. Not one claimed a body. At the morgue, the coroner's office waited 5 days for legal guardians to come forward. Nothing. In the end, Loretta Harrow, even in custody, was listed as next of kin for all 10. The state of Arkansas paid for the first arrangements. A local church covered the rest. 10 small caskets. 10 plots. 1 grave site. Reporters tried tracking the men down. A few were in prison. Some had moved out of state and started new families. Others had simply disappeared. One man hung up the moment he learned what had happened. When the judge asked during pre-trial motions if any biological fathers wished to address the court, the benches were empty. The silence around them wasn't just physical, it was cultural, it was generational. The kind of silence that follows abandonment, echoes down bloodlines, and leaves the heaviest weight on the ones who stay. In court, Sienna was asked again about the fathers. She shrugged. "I don't know. Some of them, I don't even have numbers for anymore." The shame on her face didn't change public opinion. It only added to the divide. Some viewed her as a reckless woman who didn't care. Others saw her as a product of generational cycles, ignored, unsupported, and left to figure out on her own. But there was one thing everyone agreed on. The children deserved better. Their names became hashtags, their faces painted on murals. Their birthdays were read aloud at candlelight vigils outside the school they once attended. Each child had a desk that now sat empty, and in the background of every memory, every photograph, every faded backpack and crumpled drawing, was the outline of a family that had already fallen apart long before the end. But even as the nation grieved, something darker began to surface. A local reporter, digging through archived child welfare logs, requested any records involving Loretta Harrow. What she found would change everything. 3 calls, all from Loretta. 3 documented pleas for help, all ignored. And with that revelation, the focus shifted, not just to a family, but to a system that had failed them all. The calls didn't come from the neighbors, or the school, or concerned relatives. They came from Loretta Harrow herself. 3 times in 1 year, she dialed Child Protective Services. Not screaming, not frantic, just exhausted. A woman trying to stay upright while the ground crumbled beneath her. But when the news first broke, no one mentioned those calls. Not the police, not the reporters, not the district attorney. Because those files were buried. They sat untouched in a neglected system, buried beneath case numbers and outdated software, until one journalist, Maya Ellis, filed a records request while researching Loretta's past. She didn't expect much. Maybe a noise complaint, maybe an old welfare inspection. But what she found changed the story entirely. The first report was dated late summer, August 5th, just after school started. Loretta had 8 kids in her care then, a mix of toddlers, grade schoolers, and 1 middle schooler. She asked if there were any local programs for overwhelmed caretakers. Mentioned respite care. The caseworker's note was brief. Caretaker appears tired but coherent. No signs of immediate danger. Referred to food pantry and after-school tutoring program. Case closed in 7 days. No home visit. No follow-up. The second call came in December, just before Christmas. This time she had all 10 children. She asked if any kind of short-term foster option existed. Just to rest, she said. She hadn't slept. The younger ones were restless. The older ones weren't listening. She sounded calm, but frayed. The note, house clean, children dressed, no visible concerns. Caretaker reports exhaustion. Referred to local church program. No further action. Case closed in 4 days. The third call came in early spring. Her voice was quieter, heavier. She said she'd locked herself in the bathroom the night before. Said she cried, not for any one reason, but because she didn't know what else to do. Too many voices, she said. I can't hear my own thoughts anymore. She asked if the children could be split up, asked about relatives. Even mentioned calling her daughter, Sienna, to no avail. That case note read, Caretaker reports emotional distress. Children not at immediate risk. Call classified as low priority. No follow-up required. That last line, no follow-up required, would appear in editorials, protests, and vigils for months because she had asked for help 3 times. And each time, she was told to keep going. When Maya's article went live, it exploded online. She begged. 3 warnings, all ignored. This wasn't madness. This was failure. The Child Services Agency issued a cold statement. We are saddened by the tragedy. An internal review is underway. But no one inside the agency was surprised. Former caseworkers spoke anonymously. They described heavy caseloads, overbooked calendars, broken systems. If you don't see bruises or blood, it gets pushed to the bottom, one said. Burnout isn't a reason to intervene. It's just expected. They described Loretta's voice as common, the kind of slow, quiet desperation they heard every day and had learned to tune out. Advocates blame policy, training, culture, everything. But the public saw something simpler. A woman whispered and no one answered. In court, the defense presented the reports, played parts of the calls. They didn't deny the crime, but they asked the jury to understand how the road there was paved. Experts testified about caregiver burnout, a condition where prolonged, unrelieved stress corrodes judgment and sense of self. One psychologist described it as a form of collapse that looks normal from the outside until it's too late. Another pointed to signs of high-functioning depression, smiling through fatigue, cleaning through despair, parenting through numbness. Still, the prosecution pushed back hard. They pointed out Loretta's coordination, the lack of visible breakdown, her composure during questioning, her refusal to show remorse. She made meals. She folded clothes. She arranged the children in bed. This was not a breakdown, the prosecutor said. This was a decision. The jury watched the video clips again. Loretta's voice even-keeled. Her words, simple but precise. Some jurors wept. Others clenched their teeth. Outside, the public couldn't agree. Was she evil or exhausted? Was this a crime or the system's final blow? For some, the CPS report shifted everything. They saw not just a woman who snapped, but a woman who warned them she might. The final defense witness was Renee Harrow, Sienna's cousin. She'd stayed in the house a year before the tragedy. She never screamed, Renee said, but sometimes I'd find her staring at the wall, not blinking, not moving. The lawyer asked, "Did she ever ask you for help?" "All the time," Renee replied, but not in a dramatic way. Just little things. "Can you get the kids from school today? Can you make dinner tonight?" But no one ever came through. She paused, voice cracking. She once said if she ever went quiet, it wouldn't be peace. It would mean she gave up on being heard. When Renee stepped down, the courtroom stayed quiet. For the first time, no one seemed sure what they wanted to happen next. Justice? Yes. But punishment? That word suddenly felt too small. Because this wasn't just about what Loretta did. It was also about how many people stood by and watched her drown, and then looked away. By the time Loretta Harrow returned to courtroom for sentencing, the story had changed. Not legally, but publicly. The world knew more now about the ignored phone calls, the empty mailboxes, the burnout caseworkers, and the neighbors who stopped asking questions. But none of that undid what had happened. 10 children still lay buried beneath a mural and 10 granite headstones at Evergreen Memorial Park. Their names carved in clean lines, their birthdays etched in stone. The courtroom was packed, not with protesters this time, but with silence. Reporters whispered near the back. Family members sat motionless in the front. Sienna Harrow, the children's mother, wore black again, though this time her hair was tied back, her face pale, unreadable. Loretta walked in flanked by 2 deputies. She wore the same beige prison uniform, her posture stiff, eyes forward. She didn't look at the benches, didn't glance at the children's portraits, still displayed behind the prosecution table, each face smiling, each child forever frozen in time. The clerk stood, and one by one, she read the charges again. Count 1, murder in the first degree. Each name was spoken, each child, a pause between each. Loretta didn't blink. She didn't lower her head. Her hands remained folded in her lap, the way they had been when the officers first found her sitting in that quiet living room, surrounded by stillness. The judge stared at her for a long moment before speaking. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't read from a script. "Mrs. Harrow," he said softly, "you were the last person they saw, the last arms that held them, the last voice they heard. And instead of love, they met silence." He paused. "I sentence you to 10 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole." There was no sound, no gasp, no cries. Not yet, because the judge turned to Loretta once more. "You may speak if you wish," he said. And for a moment, just a breath, it seemed she might decline. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. But then she looked up, not at the judge, not at the prosecutor, at Sienna, and she spoke. "I raised them longer than their mother ever did." The courtroom erupted. Someone near the front stood and stormed out, slamming the door behind them. A woman sobbed. Another cursed under her breath. Even the bailiffs seemed frozen. Sienna didn't move. She just stared, mouth trembling, chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm, her hands clenched into fists. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order, but there was no order left to keep. Loretta was escorted out quietly, without resistance. Her eyes never left her daughter's. And just like that, she was gone. The world seized on her words. I raised them longer than their mother ever did. That quote became the new headline. It replaced a note on the fridge. It replaced the 911 transcript. It replaced everything. TV panels debated whether it was an accusation, a confession, or a final act of emotional violence. Some called it cold truth. Others called it emotional deflection. Online, people split again. A new wave of commentary flooded the forums. "She's not wrong," one person posted. "But that doesn't make it right," another replied. Sienna stayed silent for a while, until the documentary Cruise arrived. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Channel 14 aired a special, The House on Marion Street. Sienna agreed to appear. The camera found her in a modest apartment 2 counties over. Her new home, barely furnished, quiet. A single photograph on the wall, the oldest 3 children, standing at a bus stop. The interviewer didn't pull punches. "Did you abandon your kids?" Sienna didn't flinch. "No," she said. "I left them with my mother because I trusted her." "But you didn't come back," the reporter pressed. She paused, and for the first time in weeks, she cried. "I wasn't ready to be a mother of 10. I wasn't ready to be a mother of 1. The backlash was swift. Clips from the interview went viral. One section in particular struck a nerve. "I thought she could handle it. She always did before." Critics pounced. "You thought she could handle it?" "She called for help 3 times. Mother of the Year can't even name the last time she called home. Even some of Loretta's remaining relatives refused to speak with Sienna after that. One cousin wrote on Facebook, "You left and stayed gone. The rest is just noise." But not everyone wanted blood. Some viewers began asking harder questions. Where was the system when Loretta begged for help? Where were the fathers? That question about the fathers had been whispered in court, but never spoken on the record. Until now, court transcripts, school records, and hospital forms showed what few dared say publicly. Of the 10 children, 8 had different fathers. Most never involved. None ever stepped forward. During legal proceedings, not a single father showed up to claim a body. Not one sat in the courtroom. Not one asked to speak. The coroner's office waited 2 full weeks before proceeding with release of remains. And with no guardian to accept them, Loretta was still listed as next of kin, even after everything. Sienna claimed she couldn't track them down. She blamed bad choices and worse timing. But the public didn't let it go. Investigators tried to reach out to several of the named men. One had relocated to another state. 2 had prior drug charges. 1 denied paternity outright. 3 didn't return calls. By the end of the month, it was clear none of the fathers would be involved. Not now, not later, not even in death. The community responded. 10 small caskets, 10 unclaimed lives. The city council voted unanimously to create a memorial garden behind the community center. 10 trees were planted. A granite slab bore the names. Above them were the words etched in quiet defiance. They were not invisible. At the dedication ceremony, a retired social worker spoke softly to the gathered crowd. "We talk about monsters. We talk about murder. But we never talk about the long silence that comes before it." She looked out across the crowd. "And maybe it's time we did." But even as the community tried to heal, one house refused to be forgotten. On Marion Street, the Harrow house stood like a monument to every mistake that couldn't be taken back. Overgrown, shuttered, silent. Children stopped riding their bikes past it. Neighbors kept porch lights on all night. Some said the door creaked open by itself. Others claimed to hear crying in the early morning hours. One man swore he saw lights flicker in the back window, even after the power was shut off. But when the city sent a worker to check it out, he left within 15 minutes. He never said what he saw, only that he wouldn't go back. Weeks passed, then months. The house on Marion Street stood still, but had not been forgotten. Its windows stared like hollow eyes into a community still unsure how to grieve what had happened inside. The laughter was gone, the toys long removed. The porch, once crowded with shoes and bicycles, now collected nothing but dead leaves and wind-blown trash. What remained was the silence. But even that wasn't still. Neighbors began reporting strange things. Lights flickering despite no working electricity. A porch step creaking under invisible weight. A child's voice, soft, unintelligible, drifting through the air around 3 a.m. The city received enough calls to dispatch a crew. A maintenance contractor named Ron Vale was assigned to survey the structure. It was supposed to be a standard inspection, evaluate the foundation, document damage, recommend whether to demolish or renovate. He arrived on a Wednesday morning. Overcast skies, keys in hand, clipboard under one arm. The house met him with cold air, not just from disuse, something colder. He paused at the door before entering, almost like the building itself was holding its breath. Inside, the walls still held faint outlines where family photos used to hang. The kitchen sink dripped, though the water had been cut off for weeks. Ron turned back before reaching the stairs. He left the clipboard on the porch. He never returned to the job. Later, he would tell friend, there were voices upstairs. Real voices. But no one was home. The city decided not to press further. Liability, they claimed, privately. They admitted no one wanted to be assigned to Marion Street House anymore. Still, people talked, and someone else was listening. A freelance documentarian, Theo Calvert, began compiling a podcast episode titled The House with 10 Names. He had covered cold cases before, but never one that still felt so raw, so unfinished. Theo started interviewing neighbors, case workers, old teachers, anyone who had known the Harrow family. But the most unexpected interview came when he received a voicemail from a woman with a soft drawl and a shaky voice. I saw something, she said. Before it happened, her name was Gloria Nix, and she used to live 2 doors down from the Harrows. She met Theo at a diner just off the interstate, her hands trembling over a cup of tea. You won't believe me, she said, but it's true. Theo pressed record. Gloria's story was simple and chilling. She remembered hearing Loretta's voice talking to herself at night on her back porch, not muttering, conversing, as if someone was answering back. She remembered the children's bedtime stories being read long after the lights were off, sometimes more than one voice at a time. And she remembered one night in particular, 6 weeks before murders, when she swore she saw one of the children standing in the front yard at 2 a.m., staring at nothing, not moving. When she called out, the child blinked and walked back inside wordlessly. Gloria told Theo, it wasn't just stress. That house had held something. Theo didn't believe in ghosts. But when he played back the interview later, he heard something strange in the background. A faint voice. Not Gloria's. Not his. Just a whisper. Mama? He ran audio diagnostics. There was no logical explanation. No background noise in the diner. No second microphone. He didn't include the whisper in the final podcast episode. He told no one, but it stayed with him, just like the story did. The final episode went live 2 weeks later. The House with 10 Names became the #1 true crime podcast on 3 platforms within 48 hours. Listeners were captivated, not just by the horror of what had happened, but by the emptiness that followed. No clear villain, no redemption, just silence and questions. Theo ended the series with a line that stuck with many. Some houses echo, others absorb. This one it remembers. Back in prison, Loretta Harrow heard about the podcast from a corrections officer. They told her casually during medication rounds. You're famous now, the officer said. People can't stop talking about your house. Loretta didn't respond at first, but just before the officer walked away, she said one thing, very quiet, almost like she was talking to herself. That house wasn't mine. It was theirs. Meanwhile, Sienna moved again. Too many eyes. Too many whispers. Too many reminders that no matter where she went, she was still the woman who had lost 10 children and left them with someone who couldn't hold on. She enrolled in therapy, tried to attend support groups, once attempted to visit the memorial garden, but turned around halfway there. I couldn't breathe, she told her therapist. The only thing she visited regularly was a locked storage unit on the edge of town. Inside were bins of clothing, crayon drawings, old backpacks. One bin had a taped-up photo album. She hadn't opened it since the trial. One night, she tried. She made it to the 3rd page, then shut it, dropped it, and vomited in the corner. The album stayed on the floor after that, untouched. Sienna wasn't charged with anything, not legally, but that didn't stop people from letting her know what they thought. Sticky notes left on her car. You let it happen. You're no mother. Even when she changed her name, just slightly, someone always found her again. Her new social profiles were private, but screenshots still found their way onto forums. A picture at the DMV. A photo of her in line at a coffee shop. One thread called her the mother who disappeared twice. Some users theorized she'd eventually take her own life. Others said she'd find a new man and have more kids, and then leave again. But no one talked about the nightmares she was having. The dreams of water, teeth, footsteps, and the one recurring dream of 10 small shadows sitting at a dinner table, none of them speaking, just staring, waiting. One night, she woke up to knocking. 3 soft knocks, then silence. When she opened the door, no one was there. Just a note, plain white paper, no envelope, folded once. On it were 5 words. They still remember your voice. The house on Marion Street didn't scream. It didn't collapse under flashbulbs or caution tape. It just faded. First, the curtains were pulled shut. Then the lawn grew tall. The mailbox filled, then overflowed. No one claimed the property. No one cleaned it out. It was as if the entire home had exhaled and decided not to breathe again. By autumn, the paint had started to peel. A few roof shingles slipped. But the most unsettling thing wasn't the decay. It was the silence. No toys in the yard. No Saturday cartoons through the window. No barking, no singing, no chaos. Just quiet. Neighbors said the house felt like it was listening and watching. The city debated tearing it down. Officials whispered about turning the space into a memorial garden or a community parcel. But no one followed through. The paperwork stalled. Inspections were missed. And somewhere between good intentions and quiet avoidance, the house was left behind. One city employee went to assess the property, but turned back before unlocking the door. It felt wrong, she said, like I was interrupting something. Weeks later, someone spray-painted the sidewalk outside, a line of 10 stars, each one a different color. Beneath them, in thin white letters, they deserve better. No one claimed the mural. No cameras caught the artist. But the paint didn't fade, not even in the rain. Children from a nearby school began leaving things under the stars. Stickers, crayons, handwritten notes folded into fourths. Most of them said the same thing. I remember. Loretta Harrow, once the talk of every radio station, now lived in near total obscurity. No interviews, no profiles, no headlines. She spent her days in a quiet prison ward, where the nurses said she rarely spoke unless asked a direct question. Some of them called her the Watcher. Others avoided her wing entirely. Once, a new inmate tried to provoke her, called her a monster to her face. Loretta didn't flinch. She only whispered, "You weren't there," and that was the end of it. Her daughter, Sienna, moved away quietly. New apartment, new number, no forwarding address. She tried to rebuild, but everywhere she looked, she saw shadows. Sometimes in grocery aisles, sometimes in school hallways, occasionally in dreams that turned to ice halfway through. The internet had largely forgotten her, but she hadn't. She remembered every text she didn't answer, every weekend she disappeared, every name she never taught her new boyfriend to pronounce. She told herself she hadn't known, but she'd felt it. That's what haunted her, not what Loretta did, but the fact that something inside her had known, and she hadn't gone home anyway. Years passed. The lot on Marion Street stayed untouched. The porch rotted. The windows cracked. A sapling grew through a hole in the roof. The only movement came on windy nights, when the screen door tapped gently against the frame, even though it had been nailed shut. One Halloween, a group of kids dared each other to knock. They didn't make it past the gate. One of them swore they heard singing. Soft, distant. A lullaby. Not eerie. Not threatening. Just sad. They ran. Never came back. Eventually, the city posted a sign. Condemned property. No entry. But even that fell down in a storm and was never replaced. Sienna, now working under a different name, tried to forget. But every year, on a certain week in March, she stayed inside. She didn't check her phone. She didn't post. She turned off the TV. And still, she remembered 10 voices, 10 shoes by the door, 10 tiny hands reaching up for help she couldn't give. At the local community center, a quiet memorial now stood near the basketball court. It wasn't flashy. No candles or crowds. Just a metal plaque and a painted tree with 10 names hanging like leaves. Underneath, God not unheard. It wasn't much, but it was something. And the house? It still stands. No one's lived there since. Developers say the land is cursed. Inspectors say the structure is unsalvageable. Realtors don't return calls about the listing. Sometimes lights are seen in the windows, but there's no electricity. Sometimes music plays faintly inside, but no speakers exist. Sometimes a child's laughter echoes from the backyard, but the fence has long collapsed. The story of Loretta Harrow didn't end with a gavel or a verdict. It ended with a question. How far can you stretch a person before they break? How much weight can a heart carry before it chooses silence? And more hauntingly, what happens when someone gives everything they had and no one notices until they have nothing left? This was fiction. But somewhere in some forgotten town, there's a grandmother saying yes too many times. There's a daughter who won't return calls. There's a system checking boxes instead of checking in. There's a house with too many voices and not enough doors. There's a silence, building, waiting. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and share, not just for the story, but for the ones we never hear about. Because sometimes fiction is only a few steps ahead of the truth.